What's going on, guys? Assalamu alaikum. Nelson here, a Linode developer advocate. In this Docker series, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about Docker. Docker is a great tool for testing, building, and deploying your applications. For this series, we're going to play around with Docker inside of a Linode VPS. So there is a $100 credit under the description of this video so that you can get started and follow along throughout the series. For this video, I want to make sure that you fully understand the Docker architecture. You'll understand containers, images, Docker registries, how the client and server work, so using the Docker daemon, and then I'm going to show you how easy it is for you to deploy a real application using Docker and Linode. If you're new to this channel, go ahead and subscribe, smash the like button, and comment down below. Without further ado, let's kick off this video. Let's kick off by understanding what Docker is. So Docker is a platform for building, running, and shipping applications. So developers can easily build and deploy applications running in containers. And I'm going to touch more about containers in a second. But the cool thing here is that local development is the same across any environment. So, sometimes there might have been a scenario where it kind of works on your machine, but it doesn't work on the dev environment or testing environment or someone else's machine. Then Docker solves all of those issues. And also, Docker is quite popular when it comes to CI and CD workflows. It simply means continuous integration. So this is making sure that your application can always be integrated into an environment. And then the CD part is actually taking the build from the CI and then deploying that into an environment, for example, right? So I said that developers can easily build and deploy applications running in containers. So what exactly is a container? Well, you can think of a container as basically a container, as you see here. And basically what it is it's an isolated environment for running your application. And what's really important to note is that within this container, so it's an isolated environment. So this means that within the container itself, it has everything that your application needs. So this includes the operating system. So whether it's Linux or any other distribution, it contains all the tools and, more important, the application itself, right? So here, for example, we have a Spring Boot application, but this could be a Node application or a JavaScript application, a front end, a Python application, whatever, right? You can take any programming language and then package up into a container where you can run it, right? And you'll see this in a second. So as I said, basically inside of the container, you have the operating system, tools and binaries, and more important, the actual software. Now, when it comes to the workflow, it's as follows. So you have your code. Then what you do is you build a Docker image. And then from the Docker image, you then run a container. So it's as simple as this. Now, from one image, you can actually run multiple containers, which is a cool thing, right? So in this case, I'm actually showing you that basically you have, JavaScript application or Nginx or Postgres, but technically from one image, you can run a bunch of containers, basically, right? So this is pretty much Docker in a nutshell. Now, before we move any further, let me actually explain virtual machines, because it's something that you need to know. What is the difference between Docker and virtual machines? So a virtual machine, it's a VM, right? Which provides an abstraction of the physical hardware, turning one server into multiple servers, right? And what you have is the hypervisor on top of it, which basically allows multiple VMs to run on a single machine. And what's important here is that basically you have a full copy or a full OS for each virtual machine, and it can be really slow. But in reality, it looks like this, right? So you have the infrastructure and you have the hypervisor, and then on top of it, you have the actual virtual machine. So here, let's say that you have one application, so app A, right? So that sits on top of a virtual machine. And then inside you have a full guest operating system. This is a full guest operating system. If you want to deploy a second application, then you can have a second VM and then a third VM, so on and so forth. And the most popular VM softwares out there are, for example, VMware or Toolbox, but obviously there are others. Now, Docker, in contrast, uses containers, which is an abstraction at the app layer. And basically, as you saw with that container diagram, which packages the code and all dependencies together. And basically, multiple containers can run on the same machine, and they share the exact same operating system kernel. So basically, each container runs as an isolated process in its own user space. So you can see that this is much better, right? And obviously containers, they take up less space than virtual machines because you don't have to run the entire full copy of the operating system. So in diagram looks like this. So here you've got the infrastructure, then you have the host operating system. On top of it, you have Docker. And then basically with Docker, then you can actually run multiple containers. So here, app A, so this is one container, app B, C, so on and so forth. Now to put both side by side, so you can see exactly what I mean, is as follows. So here you can see that the only difference really is that you don't have the hypervisor and you have Docker on top of it, and then you don't have a full-blown operating system for each application. So there are, pros and cons, but the difference really is that Docker is portable, requires less memory. All containers share the same operating system. They start in milliseconds, so it's very fast, process isolation, and it's very popular these days, right? So if you want to, become a DevOps engineer or a full stack engineer, then you should and must know Docker. Now, VMs, on the other hand, they require more memory because you need a full operating system, and they run on its own operating system, as I said now, and then the startup time can take minutes sometimes. So some people argue that it's more secure because you kind of have an operating system per application, but that brings a lot of complexity, right? But it's less popular these days, so Docker wins it all day. Now let's talk about the Docker architecture, because I feel it's really important for you to understand it moving forward. So the Docker architecture works as follows. So you have the client and you have the server. So you have the client, the server, which is a Docker host, and then you have registries. Now, inside of the Docker host, you have the Docker daemon. And from the client, you can issue commands such as Docker build, Docker run, Docker pull, so on and so forth. So that command or that request from the client talks to the daemon. And let's say that you want to run an application, for example. So that talks to the daemon, that goes to the registry, and the registry basically is where you keep your application images. So in here, let's say that we have all of these 4 images. So a Spring Boot application, a Postgres, a JavaScript application, or Nginx, for example. And I'll show you all of this in a second. Then basically, so you want to run an application, it goes to the server talks to the registry, and then it pulls down the actual image to the host. So here, let's say that we've pulled 2 images. And then from the image, remember, I said that we can run containers. So here, let's say that we just want to run, for example, just this Spring Boot application, right? And there we go. So now we have an application up and running. If you want to run Postgres, for example, you can say Docker run and then specify the actual image, and then it runs the image for you. Now that you know about Docker and the differences between VM and how it works, containers, so on and so forth, as well as the registries, let's go ahead and install Docker so you see all of this in action. So what we're going to do now is actually use Docker in a virtual machine. So you can install Docker locally on your machine, as I've got in this website. So this is the official page for Docker. So docker.com. And in here, you can see that if I click on get started, you have Docker desktop. So here you can download for Windows, Linux and Mac as well, right? But I'm not going to install this locally because I want to show you how simple it is for you to have Docker in a real server hosted on the cloud. So for that, we're going to use Linode. So here, let me go to the official page. So linode.com. And once you have an account with them, you can go and basically log in. So as I said, you've got $100 off, which you can find the link under the description of this video. So here I'm going to click on login and then my username followed by my password. There we go. And I'm going to trust this device and then log in. And let me just save the password as well. And there we go. So now if I zoom in a little bit, so you can see that the UI is really straightforward to use in here. And this is why I love Linode, right? The simplicity that they have in their user interface. So in here on the Linode section, click on create and here Linode. So this is a Linux server. So high performance SSD Linux servers. You've got volumes, node balances, firewalls, domains, so on and so forth, including Kubernetes. So here, let's go ahead and create Linode. And in here, you can see that we have a couple of options that we can basically choose from. So go to Marketplace and here we can select an app and I'm going to choose Docker in here. We can see that we have a bunch of other apps, right? And if I scroll down, so here for the Docker options, command to run, let's just say Docker and then run -d-p and then 80:80 right here and then Docker / getting and then started. And I'm going to explain this in a second, but this is the command which will run. And then this will actually basically run this image as a container, right? So you saw that from the image, we get container, and this is what this command is actually doing. But don't worry, I'm going to explain this in a second. So now let's actually scroll down. So leave everything as is. And here for the image, let's choose Debian. And then region. So basically, let me just explain. So this image right here, so this is for the Linux distribution, basically. And then for the region, so here, choose the one closest to you. So I'm in UK, so I'm going to choose London, UK. And right here for the Linode plan, so this is the actual Linux server itself. So you can see that we have shared CPU, dedicated, high memory, and GPU. So here I'm going to choose the smallest one possible, which is the first one. So $5 monthly, select that. And then I'm going to leave basically the tags empty. And then for the root password, I'm going to paste this password, which I have basically generated. And you can generate any password that you have. And in here, so for the SSH key, right, I'm not going to add a public SSH key because I don't have, or actually because I haven't generated the public and private keys. So I'm just going to leave this empty. And then that's about it. So now let's just create the server. So create Linode. And there we go. So you can see that it's very straightforward, right? So let me just don't save this password. And you can see the state is provisioning. So in a second, this will be ready and have a look. So here we have the public IP address, which we can access. And we also have the SSH access in here. So this is when you want to jump onto the box. And we're going to see this in a second. So just give me a second. Once this is ready, then I'm going to show you how to access the application. So now it's actually booting. And there we go. So now it's actually running. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this IP address. So this is the public IP address in here, copy. And then I'm going to open a new tab, paste the IP address, enter, and then check this out. And this means that we have Docker configured with Linode, and you can see that was really straightforward. So there you have it. In the next video, what we're going to do is actually connect to the Linode. So we're going to SSH into it, and then I'm going to show you how to basically use Docker inside of the virtual machine. So this is all for now. I'll catch you on the next one. Assalamu alaikum.